Hello and welcome to Calendar. Tonight here at Valley Parade in Bradford, we look back at one of the most momentous days in the history of this famous city.
40 years ago this weekend, the day started as a celebration for Bradford City fans, but ended in unimaginable horror with the loss of 56 lives. This evening, we'll hear first-hand accounts of those who witnessed the tragedy.
The players.
We can't let this disaster just drift away. It's changed football forever.
The firemen.
Probably the worst day ever. I think that's how you can describe it, the worst day ever.
The survivor.
When I watched my hands and the paint on the wall bubbling up, I did gaze up at the ceiling at the time. I saw all the flames rolling across the roof.
The nurses.
I was really scared of what I might see. It did shape me as a nurse and as a person, really.
And the family.
When he was going and he got to the back door and he turned round and he just said to me, I might be delayed getting home. But he never came home at all.
Sunday marks 4 decades since one of the worst stadium disasters the country has ever known.
For anyone who didn't witness it or the aftermath, it's hard to comprehend the seismic effect felt across the city from those reeling from grief or those trying to pick up the shattered pieces of their lives.
The fire started as a tiny flicker in the far right-hand side of the stand behind us, and in just over 3 minutes the whole structure was fiercely alight. While hundreds escaped onto the pitch, around 250 people were injured. 56 did not get out and died in the ground.
The 25 players and officials on the pitch playing the last game of a league-winning season could initially only watch. But many had relatives and friends in the ground and were frantic to locate them.
Well, they have extraordinary memories, and we must warn you that footage of the fire will be shown throughout the programme. Starting with this piece from Jonathan Brown, who's been hearing from the players who were themselves witnesses to tragedy.
This is the moment that Bradford has dreamed about for 48 years.
It was a day in the sun after a season of success. A trophy presentation before the final game of the 1985 season, celebrations led by Bradford City's young captain.
He says well done, the crowd say well done. What a marvellous moment for Peter Jackson, born only a few miles away in Keighley.
It was a massive honour, massive occasion for the people and the fans of Bradford. There were such good fans and loyal fans, but never had real success.
Stuart McCall, John Hawley.
For veteran striker John, it was his final day in Bradford colours.
All the way through the season we'd had a great time. So it was going to be a very good celebration.
Here's David Evans in his first season with the club.
Another celebrating was the supporters' player of the year.
Nobody was interested in the game, really. It was all about the trophy and walking around. We all had a plaque and we all went out on the pitch and it said, thank you.
Nothing riding on the result. Bradford against Lincoln City was supposed to be a sporting formality until, towards the end of the first half, sport became secondary.
And we've actually got a fire in the stand on the far side of the ground.
You just cannot comprehend the speed that the actual fire went through the stand. And rather than go and find my family, I started helping people get out of the stand. It was like time stood still. There was an old guy sat, and it looked as though fire was all around him, as if it was just going to engulf him, and then all of a sudden it did.
It was just chaotic, but people still didn't know that people were dying in there.
They came to celebrate the club's promotion to the second division for the first time in 50 years, and now they're running for their lives.
In the space of 4 minutes, the all-wooden main stand burned to the ground, as in panic people desperately searched for their loved ones.
I had no idea how I was going to find him.
John's 4-year-old son Adam, like all of the players' families, was close to where the fire ignited. A fan recognised him.
He was wandering about on his own, crying his eyes out, and thought brilliantly. She said she came, brought him in, put him in the goal mouth, and then went to find me, and then brought me to him when I got hold of him. That's selfish, but my life was okay.
But many other families were not so lucky. 4 decades on, Valley Parade looks very different. But despite the passage of time, there are still reminders here.
It's quite eerie. The bad far outweighs the good, I'm afraid.
It felt as though the whole club was getting promotion, and I think it felt like the whole club went through the Bradford City Fire.
We can't let this disaster just drift away. This happened and this changed football forever, and them peoples didn't lose their lives in vain.
The team of 1985 witnessed firsthand a city's elation at success and the collective trauma of tragedy. Though they say remembering what happened here is as important today as it ever has been. Jonathan Brown, ITV News, Bradford.
And that terrible fire engulfed the main stand, which had stood for more than 70 years since the reign of Edward VII. And as you look around, it's hard to believe now, isn't it, that this new stadium is nearly 40 years old itself, opened in December 1986 and a capacity of nearly 25,000.
Well, back in 1985, the ground was markedly different. And someone reporting for Pennine Radio that day in the main stand was Tony Delahunty.
Let's get all those people out of there. Let's get those people. Just take your time. Don't rush. Go down there. Take your time going down there. Don't pull on the wire. People are coming round this. You can hear the heat. The smoke coming everywhere. We are going to have to disconnect very shortly.
Well, it's a day he'll never forget. And he's with our sports correspondent, Chris Dawkes now.
Yeah, thanks. Well, Tony, we've just heard some of your chilling commentary there from May 1985. What was going through your head that day?
I've asked myself, Chris, that question so many thousands of times. At first, it was thinking of, well, that'll be sorted in a minute, and then seconds have gone and it's not being sorted and it's getting nearer to you, and then suddenly people are fleeing all over the place and you're wondering what's going on. I think I was just in automatic pilot almost. The mouth was going, I'm not sure what the brain was doing, and then people falling down, kids going down there, there were wires all around me. I wasn't really aware of what was happening. It had turned from a football match into hell.
Must have been terrifying. We're pretty much sat in the position now where the fire actually started. What's it like being back here 40 years on?
It's not easy, I have to be honest with you. I've met an awful lot of people, I've talked to an awful lot of people, I knew a lot of people at the time. It was an awful experience, but out of that awful experience, Chris, and this did come, I met some people who gave so much to everybody else. The radio station I worked with at the time, they worked really hard to help people as well. There were some lovely people came out of that. Unfortunately, some lovely people died too.
Well, Tony, thank you so much for sharing your experience with us today. Thank you. Back to you, Ian and Lara.
Yes, thanks to Tony and to Chris. Well, the speed at which the fire spread was shocking. The blaze took hold in seconds, and within minutes the entire stand was engulfed.
Fire crews dispatched to the scene were faced with the enormous task of tackling what was right in front of them, but also the heartbreaking task of identifying the remains of a growing number of victims as the afternoon wore into the evening.
Well, Lisa Adlam met 5 of those men who responded to the call and were first on the front line.
When we hit Valley Parade, really, there were just people, we were using the 2-tone horns to get through the people.
But they were just racing for their life and getting out of the way, and the heat alone must have, when they were all getting out, you know, don't bear thinking about.
Were met by horrific sight.
Probably the worst day ever. I think that's how you can describe it, the worst day ever.
In all their years fighting fires, Valley Parade was of a kind none of these men had experienced before, nor would do again. 4 were among the crews who rushed to the ground that day with little idea of what they would face. 1, off duty but pitchside already, was powerless to tackle the flames that engulfed the stand before his eyes.
I ran because that's what firefighters did. They run towards a fire. And I don't know how long it had taken me, 13, 14 seconds maybe. But by the time I got there, the fire were blazing. And you wouldn't have put it out if you'd have been stood there with the hose. It was just away. And my thoughts were, try and get as many people out of the stand as you could. So you went to the front of the wall and started pulling people over. But within just a few seconds, the fire erupted. And the heat was, and you were like everybody else, you just backed off because you couldn't get near enough to do any more.
I even remember, unlike the modern lads, they've got cloth wet legs. We had yellow plastic wet legs, and I could feel them melting on my legs. So it was just, you just had to deal with it. Sub-Officer Greg from Bradford, he just keeled over in front of us. So paramedics and ambulance people were dealing with him. And I thought, when's this going to end?
My first task, unfortunately, was putting like a spray jet, as we call it, on a pile of victims, really, dead bodies. It was just keeping them cool.
The fire had been so fast and so intense that the task quickly became one of finding victims and preserving what lay in the ashes, documenting as much as possible, both to help identify those who died and for future investigations.
I didn't know who were involved or what had been involved. I just went round from a professional point of view, and as the day got longer, realised that it was obviously a tragedy that were unfolding, and photographed every bit of evidence we could and fire safety items.
We weren't really fighting the fire, we were just what we call dagging it down, which were, if you saw any hot spots, you're doing that. But from then on, once I got in the stand, it was more about preserving the area, really, preserving the scenes.
We knew what we had to do when we did it, but we showed a great deal of respect for the people.
Next day we were on again, but I'd rather not talk about second day, but...
A hard day.
Hard, very hard, yeah. Emotionally hard, yeah.
The work they did that day in May and over the painstaking and painful days that followed would eventually help lead to new safety standards at football grounds. But for 40 years, the loss of 56 people who went to a football match and didn't return home has never been far from the minds of the men who tried to save them.
And that will never leave you, it will always be there. And I think every firefighter who went to that fire, they will feel the same. In that fire, we actually witnessed people losing their lives. And that, I think that stays with you. You never get over that.
Ben Hanney ending that report from Lisa Adlen. Well, while firemen and ambulance crews on the ground tackled the immediate aftermath, hospitals were inundated with people who'd fled the ground with varying degrees of burns injuries.
Calendar brought together a survivor of the fire and nursing staff who were part of that unforgettable day. Some have never spoken before about their experience. Katie Oscroft went to meet them, along with one remarkable patient who had a miraculous escape as the last man out.
Hundreds of badly burned spectators were taken to Bradford Royal Infirmary and St Luke's Hospital, where doctors and nurses had never seen anything like it.
Yeah. Most of the victims' burns were their hands, back of their heads, when they've been trying to escape or put fires out and things. And it would take 2 nurses probably to do each dressing, because most of the burns were quite nasty ones.
It was just chaos. What people were saying, what they'd seen, that was quite hard, I think, rather than the actual physical care that we were giving them. Obviously they were scarred, just from that event, and they must have seen some horrific things, Some of them were talking about it, some of them were just really in shock,
Distressed patients streamed through the doors.
My role, not having any kind of expertise in this area, really was helping with feeding, bed making, bed bathing, listening. People were so positive and really thankful that they'd managed to escape. I mean, they'd obviously come close to death, a lot of them.
One of those patients was Matthew Wildman, rescued against the odds.
I was very close to where the fire started in the main stand on the back row. Because everyone was enjoying themselves so much, it's as if we all couldn't tune into the fact that something was wrong. It just took everyone what seemed like an age to take it on board and actually start to do something.
Matthew's life was saved by a fellow football fan. David Hustler was treated in hospital for his own injuries. He died 10 years ago.
He was an amazing individual. He's told me that he knew when he went back in for me that we weren't getting out, and yet he still did it.
The late Professor David Sharp's groundbreaking work in the aftermath of the fire led to the setting up of a world-renowned burns research unit. He treated Matthew, then just 17, for many months.
You were the last person to be taken out who survived. How does that make you feel?
It's a special feeling. It could have been so easily the other way. It's difficult in a way to know that you've got a debt that you can never repay.
Medical staff worked on, increasingly aware that they were dealing with the fortunate ones.
A lot of things that got to us most were people looking for people.
Our neighbours, not next door but one, they were an elderly couple in the 70s and they were at the match and they actually died. And my brother actually used to go with them. But on that day, I can't remember what the event was. My brother didn't go to the match with them.
I learned a lot about human nature and about how strong and brave people can be in utterly terrifying circumstances.
40 years have passed since Matthew and these former nurses went through the worst of days. It formed a bond between them, one they wished they'd never had to share. Katie Oscroft, ITV News, Bradford.
And what a special reunion that was. And you were lucky enough to meet Matthew earlier, weren't you?
I was, Laura, yes, right here in the stands. He joined me to, well, talk about something very special to his heart, which came out of the tragedy. Matthew, here we are, 40 years on, sitting really in the place where you were 40 years ago. How does it feel?
Well, crikey, it's something else. I love Bradford City, I love the stadium, so I don't think it would matter where I was sat. I think you've got to move on. Yeah, I can almost see the view that I saw at the time. That's something.
Emotional, it must be emotional.
There's always mixed feelings. Obviously, you've got to, there'll always be that referring back to then. But of course, it was also part of a wonderful season where there was so much enjoyment came out of every game that year. And indeed that day until the tragedy that occurred. So it'll always be mixed feeling, and I always try to be positive.
Out of this awful tragedy, some good did come. And in particular, we're thinking about that burns unit and the work of the plastic surgeons and the nurses and the doctors and what they've become.
There was the best team you could ever imagine to bring it about. And of course, all that work in such a short space of time was bound to bring some great inventions, such as the Bradford sling and so on. So it wasn't any surprise that a unit would come out of it, and all those improvements would be shared around the world. New consultants and specialists have come out of that unit year on year. They're in departments all over the world doing the very best for everyone, and long may it continue.
Absolutely. Lovely to meet you. Thanks very much.
Pleasure.
Yes, Matthew Wildman talking to me a little earlier.
The terrible events of that day did result in changes to the way we watch live sport. An inquiry in 1985 headed by Justice Popplewell concluded the fire was probably caused by a discarded cigarette or match igniting rubbish under the stand, which had built up over decades. The inquiry initially led to the banning of new wooden grandstands and became a trigger for the modernising and redevelopment of many British football grounds.
Well, Yorkshire television footage formed part of the evidence in the inquest, overseen by the coroner James Turnbull. A verdict of misadventure was returned by the jury, meaning it was an accident which could have been prevented.
All the inquiries and civil court cases which followed tried to give answers to what remains this country's worst football stadium fire disaster.
Yeah, but most affected, of course, were the families who lost loved ones. Many who perished were with family members, fathers with sons and daughters, uncles, aunties and grandparents.
Tonight we hear from one of those families, Georgie, and her mum, Glenn. Well, their beloved dad and husband, Derek, lost his life here, and I spoke to them on an emotional return.
I was really excited. He was really giddy. He was like a kid. He was really, really giddy. And then when it was time for him to go, he came and gave my mum a proper kiss. And I was like...
And he picked me up.
He picked her up and spun around, and I'm like, ooh, pain, you know, that kind of thing.
He got to the back door and he turned round and he just said to me, don't start cooking at your normal time. He said, because I might be delayed getting home. Because there'll be a lot of people at this game. Never came home at all.
What a tragic day for Bradford City Football Club. I can hardly believe my eyes.
I can remember hearing John Helm's voice, and he was so shocked. And it was almost all over before you'd even realised it had begun. Our friends all went round to the different hospitals to see if he was there. It wasn't. The one thing that survived intact was the St Christopher that I'd bought him. They took me to a table and said, is there anything on here that you recognise? And that was there. It was black, but as soon as I saw it, I said, that was his St Christopher.
How did you first learn that something terrible was happening?
I was upstairs doing homework and I was listening to the match on the radio. Mum said she knew straight away.
It was like a light had been switched off.
But I said, no, he's strong. He won't, you know. And then, as the afternoon wore on, and then he didn't come home at his normal time. Obviously, no mobile phones or anything in those days. And I said, no, he'll be busy because he'll have been helping people. I think I was just trying to pretend to myself that it wasn't happening, really.
You and Derek had just renewed your wedding vows, hadn't you?
It was just such a special, lovely day. And then that was in the February, because it was sort of as near to our wedding anniversary as we could do it. And then, as I say, within a few months, that was it. It was almost like we'd had that closure between us of something special.
What does it feel like being here today?
It's bittersweet, but it's good. I think I'm glad that we're here. This is nice to be able to come back to the ground and see it in its current glory, really, because it is a beautiful place now. He was so proud of them, wasn't he?
He was. And if you listen very carefully, you can hear him cheering.
Yeah.
I agree with Mum, it's bittersweet, but it also feels a bit like a hug. It needs remembering, it deserves to be remembered, and so to be here today is like a bit like flying the flag for Dad. So, and I'm proud to do that. They're not going to be forgotten. No.
You know, Ian, it was such a privilege to meet Georgie and Glenn, who travelled all the way from the Isle of Man to meet us, and I just want to thank them for taking part in that interview.
Yes, all terribly sad, isn't it? And Derek died alongside his friend Jack Ludlam, and their ashes were scattered together in this ground in 1985. Georgie actually held her wedding reception here in tribute to her beloved dad, and yesterday it was her 26th wedding anniversary. Well, it's the families and supporters who we most remember today, of course. In the last week, current Bradford City fans celebrated in style after a last-gasp winner on the last day of the season in this ground clinched promotion to League One.
But it is those who left home for a carnival day here 40 years ago and became part of an unprecedented disaster who are in our thoughts right now. A major commemoration service will take place this Sunday in Centenary Square in Bradford.
Well, back in 1985, a charity record borrowed the famous Liverpool anthem to raise funds for those affected. Always in the thoughts of their families and friends, they will never walk alone, as the song says. From all of us here at Calendar, we're thinking of you this weekend. Thanks for watching and good night.
A clear start makes way for a day of ancient discoveries. TUI sponsors ITV Yorkshire Weather.
Hello, good evening. A warm one but mostly dry for the Leeds Marathon this weekend. Today set the scene for the next few days. A fairly chilly and misty start first thing, but plenty of sunshine from the word go and staying with us into the afternoon. Overnight tonight, largely dry and clear. Potential for some mist and fog patches, and in rural spots once more similar to last night, temperatures in the very low single figures. A touch of frost not out of the question. There is some times as we head into the weekend, 5:14 and 8:52. Beautiful start tomorrow. The lion's share of the sunshine. Into the afternoon, a bit of fair weather cloud, but we stay mostly dry. The winds are light, gentle breezes out towards the coast, but for all feeling very pleasant in the sunshine and highs inland of 21 or 22. We could be looking at 23s, 24s by the time we reach Sunday into Monday. There's the risk of some showers threatening from the southwest, but I don't think they will come to join us until Monday at the earliest. So it's a fine weekend, plenty of sunshine, feeling warm. Take care.
TUI sponsors ITV Yorkshire Weather.